Right, so episode 10. So we've stripped this down. We've done the boost pipes now. We've stripped this down. We stripped it right down so that we could cap off these ends that we kept talking about. I kept mentioning about. Now we can do one or two jobs next. We can either finish off these upper intercooler mounts, or we can work on the radiator mounts. Now, because the radiator is still kind of half welded, all the brackets on it are half welded, it probably makes more sense to finish off all of the radiator related stuff, because we're done with the intercooler bar the mounts, so we may as well finish off the radiator related stuff. So that leaves us with basically the coolant lines. So obviously this radiator was assembled for like a normal push-on fitting, and what we want to use is the AN style AN20 lines. So we've already welded the adapter onto the thermostat housing here, and we've got a 135 degree bend on. We probably would have been better off with a 120, but the price of these bends, I've had this one in stock a while, so we're going to make use of it. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to do the job. A slightly lesser angle would have been better, but it'll do the job. So we're going to have a 60 degree fitting on the bottom, which is basically going to go here like that. So the first thing we're going to have to do is chop this off and then tack on this weld fitting. Then that'll allow us to get the length of hose that we need. We can cut the hose and assemble the line. Now these lines, the big ones, are really unforgiving, and we're not going to have much hose. It's going to be pretty short piece of hose. So before I go and weld on the fitting, which will then fix that position top and bottom, I'm going to tack the fitting on, cut the hose, assemble the hose, and then if it's a bit too short or a bit too long, all I need to do is cut the fitting, cut the tacks, and adjust it a couple of millimeters up or down. That'll allow me to not have to make sure that the kind of hose fitting is bang on. I'll have a bit of room to play with then. It's just make the hose up and then kind of readjust the bottom weld on fitting to suit. Right, so we've got that cut off and got the fitting tacked on, and I can instantly see some of the problem is that we actually need that fitting to come out a bit more of an angle. At the minute, these are nowhere near lining up. Obviously, if we had a 120 bend here, it would help a little bit, but we'd still have to bring it out a bit. So just as obviously because this radiator is at an angle, the more we bring this out, the more it actually brings it up as well. So we've got kind of like two angles to think about, really. But if I just wind that off, we can kind of see that we're going to need to come back fair amount, at least an inch. I think about an inch would end up being perfect. Obviously, we can't go too far. We're going to be on that pulley. So I think if we go about an inch, we cut a piece of tube, it's about an inch long. We'll tack that onto the fitting, weld that onto the radiator, and then have another try. And I think we'll be much closer. But you can instantly see how short that piece of hose is going to be in there already. Okay, so we've extended that piece out, got a bit carried away, welded it up. Oh well. It's probably going to have to come off again anyway. Obviously the bottom tacks that we can adjust it. We obviously also need to adjust the hole size in the radiator. We've also got a bit of a gap here to kind of bridge and fill in. That'll all get done. It'll all get ported out nicely and smooth once it's all welded. Again, that's one of the kind of parts of just doing custom work. You kind of modifying things as you go a lot of the time. You're making one-offs and adjusting stuff as you go. So got that on, got that extended, now lines up nicely with this top hose. So now it's just going to be a case of measuring. Now the hoses usually come to about where the hex starts, so there's kind of like a clear line where they've been machined between hex and then taper. So the hose is usually, the end of the hose is usually about there. So we basically just need to measure the length between those two, obviously assuming a slight radius on the hose as well, because we can't just measure it, you know, point to point, because that'll be too short. We need to kind of guesstimate the radius that's going to be in there as well. And these hoses are also pretty tricky to like trim down. If you get it, you know, 10 millimeters too long, it's pretty hard to shorten it back down. So yeah, we're going to have a pretty good guess. Hopefully we get it somewhere close, and then it's just a case of adjusting where this is tacked on at the bottom to get it spot on. I'm sure there's loads of ways of doing this. If you know, feel free to put it in the comments and let me know, because it'll save me a bit of hassle in the future. Yeah, so that takes pretty much 150, 6 inches. 150 is a little bit short, so we'll go for 150. We'll go for 150. It's probably going to be better off to be a little bit too short, because this fitting's pretty much already at completely at the bottom of the radiator. So if we go for 150, if it's a bit too short, we can just hutch it up until it gets right. Okay, so these big fittings are a bit more of a challenge to assemble than the smaller ones, because they're bigger. So obviously cutting the hose down, tape it up, cut the hose down, get it as square as you can possibly get it. We just cut it with a disc cutter, because that's what we've got. There's loads of ways of cutting it. Some of you just cut it with a hacksaw. Anything that will cut this steel out of braid, we'll cut them. But obviously the neater job you do of cutting it, the easier it is to assemble. Now, again, because these are big, you want to like get a load of lube in there. So I use like silicone spray. This is Auto Smart berry fruit, so it also smells great. Get loads in there all over the welding bench, so that you have to spend hours cleaning the welding bench after. And then once you've got it all lubed up, it's a case of getting that fitting in there. You have to get the taper to sit inside that rubber, and then just wind it on. But again, these are going to be tricky, because because they're bigger, they're kind of harder to do. Everything's kind of scaled up. That's it, we got that started. And then you'll find that as you start it, some of the time it starts to push the hose out a little bit. So just whilst I'm just going to get that started, and then I'm going to put the other end in, and then we can put it into the vise. And I think I'm out of lube. Now I've got Auto Glim Rapid Detailer. Basically what you want is just any kind of silicone based lubricant. Remember, silicone based lubricant. Right, so we've got this fitting threaded on now. We've got the ends assembled, and it's come up a bit short, which is probably the ideal scenario really. If it had been any longer, the fitting would have been running off the bottom of the radiator. Obviously we can make the hose shorter and longer, but these fittings are quite tricky to assemble, especially the really big ones. So the easiest thing to do it from this point onwards is basically just to chop off the this piece of tube that we've tacked onto the radiator, screw it into the fitting, line it up in bang on the right position, mark it, take it off, take it over to the bench, tack it on, and that's it. We should be in the perfect position then. Right, so we've got the fitting cut off, the tack cut off the radiator, and the hose back on. And now with the, I don't know why I'm crouching down, the car's on a lift, I could just put it up. With the fitting screwed into the bottom of the hose, I can get that perfectly lined up and tacked on in that position basically. And I haven't got to worry about making sure the hose is bang on the right length pretty much. So yeah, I'm just going to mark that there. Obviously I need to leave enough room to get the actually tighten the nut for like the kind of the hex of the nut past the shroud, because we want to be able to make sure we can get this on and off at all times. So this is obviously where the hole was in the radiator when AirTech sent it for whatever it was for, and we want to come up from there slightly to match up to our hose. So it's going to leave us with a hole which we need to fill in. That's not a problem, but it also means that because of the width of this end tank and the -20 fittings that we're using and the rear scoop, it means that we've got to push out this fitting out to the side, and that actually leaves clearance through from this fitting onto the end tank of the radiator. So what we'll actually do now is we'll mark the inside of that hole, and then I'll actually cut down into the radiator and kind of widen it, pull it apart so that it matches up with the tubing for the fitting, and then basically patch that hole up after. So yeah, I need to mark the inside of that hole now. So that's where the hole wants to be. So what I'm going to do is here, I'm basically going to cut down into there, probably down to about there-ish, and basically just widen that out. So I'll remove all of this material here, cut down, and kind of leave that piece of material, and then widen it out so that it matches up with this fitting. Right, so we've got this re-tacked on, so we're just going to double check it now. Thread this end on first. Yeah, these fittings are actually quite a bit more difficult to work with than the smaller ones. Never really used these big ones before, never really had anything to use them on, but they're definitely, in terms of like assembling them and how like unflexible they are, obviously, you know, it's kind of like 1.25 inch diameter hose or maybe bigger. It's you know, not the easiest thing to work with. You don't have a lot of room for manoeuvring it. So yeah, that'll go something like that. Obviously, we now just need to blank up that hole and fully weld this fitting on. I have to put a little piece in here. So we've got that hose on now. That's pretty much what it's going to look like. Fits pretty good where it is. So all we need to do now is fully weld this fitting on, block up the hole below it, which is obviously where the original hole was, and then put our piece in here to kind of widen the radiator out so that it's a bit more suitable for that fitting, kind of hanging over the edge of the end tank. Then we can start working on the other side. Right, so this side's a bit trickier to navigate because we've got the turbo, the boost pipe, we've got the intake, which is going to run kind of down here. And we want to get this hose as high up as we possibly can. So this is going to get, say, a bit trickier. We're going to end up probably extending this right out. Now I'm not sure if we end up doing this with a tube or with a kind of a fitting. You know, we might end up just extending it straight out and then winding a fitting on the back almost, so we end up with like a kind of tube and fitting like that. I'm not really sure yet, so we're going to have a bit of a play around and see what works out best, basically. Because like I say, yeah, we've got a lot going on this side. We need to try and make sure we need even plenty of clearance for the intake. We need to get the coolant pipe as high up as we can. And yeah, we're also probably going to have the gearbox oil cooler core in this side of the duct as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on this side that we've got to try and take into account for. So what I've decided to go for on this side is I'm going to cut this tube down at an angle, a 60-degree angle. Obviously the radiator's at a 30-degree angle. So I'm going to cut this at an angle, and then that's going to sit at the top there, and that fitting's going to sit just behind it. So obviously we need to make sure we keep it low enough that it doesn't hit the intercooler. We need to keep it high enough that it's going to stay away from the oil cooler core, and we need to keep it tight enough in that it's going to clear the turbo air intake. We need to keep it far enough away from the duct that we can actually tighten it up. So we literally have got constraints in every single direction with this, so we are going to have to get the fitment and the kind of placement of this absolutely bang on. So yeah, we need to cut down a piece of tube now. Right, got that cut down. I've had it on here and marked up, and we're going to have it somewhere there. So what I need to do now is take the radiator off again, get that tacked on there, cut that hole out, tack that onto the radiator, try it back on. Right, so we've got that tacked on, I've got it all welded up, and I've welded up a blank over where the kind of old spout was. Obviously this radiator that AirTech gave us was off something else basically, so it already had a spout in it. We cut that off in like the 3rd episode or something like that when we was originally mounting the radiator. So I blanked that up now, had to chop the mount off in order to actually weld that blank up, but got that welded back on. So that's kind of all welded up now, solid. And we've still got clearance with this fitting, which is good, and we've just got about enough clearance on the intake for the turbo. So the intake is going to go just there basically. So again, we've got just enough room for that coolant hose to run through. The intercooler is going to sit on top here, and we've got enough room for the turbo intake in. So yeah, we've managed to kind of squeeze it all in there. It's all tight, but it's all in. So yeah, we can start working on the rest of the kind of coolant pipe around the back of the engine now. So we're going to have a braided hose to go kind of most of the way, and then what we're going to do is change this OE oil cooler for like an aluminium bar with a AN fitting welded on the end of it, so then we can just thread it on just there, or maybe a bit further forward. It'll probably come to about the kind of front of the cylinder head area, and then it's just a piece of hose from here to there basically. Right, so we've got our offcut from the other side hose, and it actually seems like this is probably going to be about the right length. Basically we want to do like a big 90-degree loop. It's really hard to see with all the turbo and stuff in the way. So what we'll do is we'll probably make the hose up, take the scoop out and show you after basically. But yeah, I'm going to put a straight fit in on the end of here, see how it looks, because we're going to need a little bit of a bend on this hose, which it does bend. Obviously the more you bend it, it starts to kind of oval out a bit in the middle. We don't need a really tight radius on it, we literally just need to get it in that general direction. And then I've got another 90-degree fitting kind of in stock. This is the only other fitting I've got. So what I'll do is I'll put this fitting on the end, put it in there, and then we'll see what it looks like if a 90 would work onto then that coolant bar which runs down the side. I think it will, but if not, maybe like a 60-degree bend would be better, because with a 90 we're probably going to need like a full-on 90-degree bend here, With a 60 we won't, so we'll get away with a slightly bigger radius on that. So yeah, first job is going to be putting that fitting on the end of there. Right, so we've got that fitting attached onto the end of here, and I've tried it in with the scoop on, and a 90 is definitely not going to work. So when that is kind of fully on there, don't need to screw it all the way on, but that'll do. What I was originally thinking was that that would come around at a 90-degree angle, and then we'd have like a 90-degree fitting here, but it's just not going to work. We're not going to get enough of a radius on that hose to get that 90-degree fitting on there. So what we're going to want is probably either like a 45 or a 60-degree hose. I think we could definitely get away with a 45 degree fitting, and that'll fit perfectly on the end of that hose and then go perfectly up to whatever we do with that. And it also clears the scoop a lot easier when we keep it nice and straight, and of course the straighter they are the better. We want to keep it flowing really nicely, so we don't want tight 90-degree bends unless we have to. So yeah, so we'll get another fitting ordered, and we can start working on that rear coolant bar. Still got to finish these upper intercooler mounts, which now we've capped that off. That's going to be easy to finish those off. Now that we've got a fitting in here, we can start looking at the turbo air inlet. We've got the front radiator scoop to look at, so there's loads still left to do. Yeah, so thanks for watching. If you like the video, please give us a thumbs up. If there's anything you think we should do or want to suggest, stick it in the comments below. If there's anything we're not showing well enough of, or anything else we can do to try and make these easier to watch, let us know, because sometimes some things are quite hard to film. It's sometimes hard trying to kind of get you in the engine bay with us, so if there's anything else we can do to make them easier to watch, let us know. Thanks for watching.